The Prismacolor Premier Pro pencils are a really popular choice for coloured pencil artists, particularly if you are a beginner. That's because they're an artist professional quality grade pencils, but they are quite affordable. So if you're looking at starting out, these pencils might be for you. Of course, there are some downsides to using these pencils. That's why I wanted to bring you this review today, just to talk about things from an all-round perspective, talk about the main pros and cons of these pencils. But anyway, let's just jump right into today's video. Let's first talk about quality, because quality is extremely important. The better quality a coloured pencil is, the more use you're going to be able to get out of it, the more sustainable it's going to be, and you're going to be replacing the pencils less and paying more money in the long run. Now, the Prismacolor pencils are a wax-based pencil, so they are naturally softer, they are more prone to wear and tear. However, there are a couple of things that I do have a problem with. So the first thing is that there is no barrel on the end of them. So when there's a protective barrel on the end of pencils, it means that it protects the pencils more from accidental dropping and breaking. Because there's no barrel on the end of these pencils, it can leave the lead a lot more prone to breaking because it's left more vulnerable. The second thing is that these pencils, the lead is actually off-centered, so that means that when you apply pressure to the paper, the lead can break more easily. However, one thing that I would note is that since I have changed the type of sharpener that I use with these pencils, I get less breakages, and that is because I find with a handheld sharpener it applies quite a lot of pressure onto these pencils, whereas the new sharpener that I use, which is a manual helical sharpener, I find that I get less breakages because it does a better job at sharpening the pencil. And I've honestly found that since using this sharpener, I get much better use from these pencils and a lot less breakages. And I get really nice, fine, sharp points as well with that sharpener. So that is definitely one thing to make note of. So the Prismacolor pencils are wax-based pencils, which I did mention at the beginning of this video. And there are some other coloured pencils which are oil-based pencils, and also some pencils which are a mix of both. Now this can have an impact on your drawings because with wax pencils they are a lot more of a softer core, so they're going to give you a lot more creamier, softer textures than what an oil pencil would do. So with the Prismacolor pencils, I get really good, soft, subtle shading. These pencils are best for portraits, also comics, cartoons, that sort of thing, and also adult colouring books as well, where you want to be applying more softer core tones and shading to your drawings. These pencils are also really easy to blend because they are a lot softer core. Whereas with the oil pencils, what you find is that they are a harder lead, so they are better for things like details, but they're not as good for blending, and it takes a lot more layers and patience to get them to blend like the Prismacolor pencils do. So there are a couple of differences there, which is worth noting, but you can get good details with the Prismacolor pencils as well. It just takes a little bit more time. You might have to sharpen your pencils more as well. If we have a look at the two side by side, you can also see how the wax-based pencil, which is the Prismacolor, has worn down a lot more quicker than the oil-based pencils. So that's what I was saying in terms of wear and tear. You'll get a lot more wear and tear with your Prismacolor pencils a lot quicker than you would with an oil-based pencil. One thing that I love to do for all of my coloured pencils is I do love to do colour swatches, and they're a great way to really see a pencil's pigment in the core and actually have it on paper. Also, testing colour swatches on different types of paper is important as well, so you can really see how colours are going to show up on different types of paper. The other reason why I also love doing colour swatches is especially if you have a limited palette. So for example, if you've just bought a really small set of Prismacolor pencils, then it's going to be important for you to stretch those colours as far as you can. So doing things like colour swatches and colour mixing charts is really important because it's going to enable you to stretch your colours further, play around with different colours, mixing them together and seeing what alternative colours you can get just from a small set of pencils. I do actually have some free downloadable charts available on my website. If you want to download those charts, print them off and colour them in, then you can. They are available on my website and the link is in the description. I also love doing colour swatches because it gives you a real idea of how the colours lay and how they feel on the paper as well. And it's important to do this before you jump straight into a drawing, just so that you can get an idea and get used to how you can use these pencils, because every pencil does feel different. So let's talk a little bit about cost and sets. Now the issue is with this is that depending on where you live, the cost is going to vary, the sets are going to vary as well. So it's very difficult for me to be able to say that Prismacolors cost around this much, but in general what I would say in comparison to other coloured pencils for artists, they are sort of middle of the road. They're a lot more affordable than some brands, but they are more expensive than others. I would say that they are good for beginners though, because they are in that sort of middle range, so they're not really out of your price range. The other really good thing about Prismacolors is that because they have a variety of sets, you can just buy them in smaller sets or in larger sets if you wish to, and you can also buy these pencils in open stock as well, so as individual pencils. So there's a lot of variety here in terms of the cost and sets. So let's move on to some techniques now with these coloured pencils. We're going to start with layering pencils. Now because the Prismacolor pencils are wax based, they are really soft, which I've already mentioned. And because of that, layering is really easy. It's a lot easier to layer these pencils than it would be if you were using oil pencils. Because they are so creamy, it's really easy to get a nice coverage on the paper as well. Obviously you may find that layering pencils is a little bit more difficult depending on the type of paper that you're using, so that's really important to note as well. The paper that I am using is a smooth textured paper. I find that Prismacolor pencils layer best on this type of paper because they are soft and they lay much softer on a smoother paper. On a more rougher texture paper, they are a little bit more grainy, but they are still really good at layering because of their soft core. This is why Prismacolor pencils are best for pieces where you're going to be layering a lot of colours. So for example, with portraits where you have a lot of skin tones, these pencils will be brilliant because you can layer lots of different colours together without them becoming really muddied. So let's move on to burnishing. So burnishing would be coming at the end stage of a drawing. Burnishing is just where you apply pressure to your paper just to smooth out the paper grain. And because again these are soft core pencils, they are absolutely brilliant for burnishing. So if you were, for example, drawing portraits and you wanted to burnish the layers of skin, it's really easy to do this. Obviously again, type of paper does make a difference, but also the way that you burnish as well. So you would want to be burnishing in circular motions just to eliminate any stop and start lines, as obviously circular motions have no start and stop lines. Also, thinking about your hand position as well is really important, so the way that you hold your pencils can make a difference in terms of burnishing. The one thing that I would say is that with these pencils, because they are wax based, they will leave more of a pigment on the paper, so when you hold up a drawing to the light, you might find that you get more of a glare than what you would with oil based pencils. So that is one negative I would say about Prismacolor pencils and wax based pencils in general. But as you can see here, I'm getting really nice soft blending because of the fact they are soft core, the type of paper that I'm using, and also the way that I am using my pencils as well. I really like using Prismacolors, particularly for portraits. The other thing about burnishing is that you do want to do this right at the end of your drawing because it's quite hard to go over those areas again with colour. So let's talk about blending pencils. Now it is similar to burnishing, but there are differences to this. Blending is more related to if you want to blend different colours together. So if, for example, you've got a limited palette and you really wanted to try and stretch your palette further and mix a lot of colours together, you want to be using pencils that are going to be able to mix well together. and the Prismacolor pencils do, because they are soft core. So it's very, very easy to layer different colours into each other and blend them together. Obviously you want to be starting with your lightest layers first and moving your way up to darker tones. You'll get a better transition of colours and blending by doing it this way, rather than going from light to an extreme dark colour. But in terms of going from light to mid to dark tones, it's really good to do this with these pencils. They give you really good results, and I find that blending is excellent with these pencils as well. Obviously, again, the way that you blend your pencils, the colours that you use and the type of paper that you use also has an impact as well. Now you may want to use a dry blender if you want to speed up the process of blending. So obviously coloured pencils is a very slow medium, Prismacolor pencils is no exception. And one way that you can actually speed up the process of your drawing is by using a dry blender. So if, for example, you're building up a lot of tone and values in your drawing and you then wanted to smooth everything out, one way that you can do this is by using a dry blender. Now Prismacolor actually has their own colourless pencil blender, which I am actually using in this video, and I feel that it actually works really well. So obviously, once you've gone and applied all of the colours that you want to, you just go ahead and use this dry blender just to create soft blending and eliminate that white paper grain. You want to make sure that you've applied all the colours and tones that you want to before you do this, because it's going to be very difficult for you to go over these areas once it's blended. And another tip I have for using a pencil blender like this is to make sure that it is sharp so that it can get into all the areas of the drawing, and also because a blunt blender will mean that it will scratch the paper. You can also use a white pencil for blending as well, but a white pencil would also be good for highlights too. So the white pencil that you use, you do want to make sure is opaque. Now the white pencil within the Prismacolor set is a good white pencil. I do use this pencil a lot, and I'll use it in combination with other pencils as well, because it is quite opaque. This pencil is really good for both blending and for creating highlights. So if you want to use this pencil as a blender, then what you can obviously do is apply all the layers of colour that you want to, and then go in at the end with the white pencil and start to blend using circular motions. A tip I have for blending with a white pencil again is to make sure that the pencil is sharp. This will avoid you scratching the paper if it's blunt, but also because a sharp pencil will allow you to have a more even coverage of blending as well. If you're wanting to use the white pencil for highlights, it's a really good pencil to use because it is so opaque, so you'll be able to have highlights showing up really well in whatever areas you need to highlight. So what about using a solvent? Does a solvent work well with Prismacolor pencils? Well, the short answer to that is yes, it does. I do find that I get better results with using oil pencils and a solvent. However, I do get good results with Prismacolor pencils as well. It is worth noting that the type of paper you use with a solvent is the most important thing here, because if you're using the wrong type of paper with a solvent, you're not going to get the results that you're wanting. So the most important thing is not actually the Prismacolor pencils, it's the paper. You want to make sure that your paper is thick enough so that it can absorb wet mediums, but also you want to make sure it's the right type of paper, so paper texture as well. When I am blending a solvent in combination with Prismacolors, I make sure that I am using either a rounded paintbrush or a cotton swab, just because this really helps to eliminate any stubborn lines and get that smoothness of blending. Using a solvent when I'm drawing animals really helps to eliminate a lot of the time that I'm spending on drawing fur, and it speeds up the process. So if you're an animal drawer, you might find using a solvent is really beneficial to you. And there you can see just some of the results that we've got from doing the tests that we've done so far. If you are creating drawings that are going to have a lot more texture and a lot more detail, then this is where you may find the Prismacolor pencils struggles a little bit more. So obviously, because they are softer core, they're absolutely fantastic for your softer core textures. For example, if you were drawing skin. But where these pencils struggle is when we're going into creating detail, and that is because they are softer core, so they won't hold a point for long. Now, as I said earlier on, I find that these pencils work best using a helical sharpener. The one that I use is actually in the description as well if you want to go and check it out. And I find that this sharpener works best because it sharpens the pencils better and they sharpen to a really fine point. That is the most important thing with Prismacolors. When you're creating details, you want to make sure they're as sharp as possible and you keep sharpening them to make sure they retain their sharp point. Unfortunately, because they are softer core, they're not going to hold their sharpness for as long as an oil-based pencil. So with oil pencils, you can go longer in between sharpening, but for a pencil like Prismacolor that is wax, you will need to sharpen them a lot more. Because of that, obviously you're going to get a lot more wear and tear. So you'll find that your pencil will start to become shorter and shorter because you're sharpening it a lot more. And you need to factor in cost into that as well. The fact that if you're creating a lot of detailed work, you'll be getting through Prismacolors a lot more than an oil-based pencil. Other ways that I create details with Prismacolors is by using an X-Acto knife, and I really love using this technique because it creates a lot of fine details, especially fur. However, I do find again that I get better results with using oil-based pencils like the Polychromos as opposed to using Prismacolors. But it doesn't mean that you can't create details, it's just a little bit harder. Another technique that I use, or tool that I use, is an embossing tool to create textures and details as well. And what you do is you use the embossing tool first and you gently score the paper. And then what will happen is once you colour over those areas that you've scored with your pencils, you will find that the areas where you've scored will stay preserved because you flattened those areas. So again, this is great for creating certain details and textures. I do get good results with Prismacolors, although I do find that the Prismacolor pencils themselves leaves a bit more pencil residue on the paper as opposed to the oil-based pencils, for example Polychromos. So when you create these types of details with the Polychromos pencils, you do in general find that the Polychromos pencils, because there is less pencil residue left, they show up better. But it is also worth noting that on the flip side, the Polychromos pencils are not as good for layering and blending because they're not as softcore as the Prismacolor pencils. So as you can see, just a slight difference there. It's nothing major, but I would say you get better results with the Polychromos and oil pencils in general as opposed to Prismacolor and wax. Lightfastness is a pencil's ability to resist against fading in natural light. So you want to be using pencils with a good lightfast rating if you're going to be selling or showcasing your drawings. Now you can find the Prismacolor Pencils Lightfast charts online. I've got these PDF files here. What I would say is that they're a mixed bag, so some pencils are a good Lightfast rating, whereas others are not. So in particular, the more vibrant tones within Prismacolors I have noticed are not good Lightfast rating. So in terms of those pencils, what I would do is I would switch them out with other pencils that do have a good Lightfast rating. Because if you use these pencils with lower grade Lightfast rating, your colours will be more prone to discolouring in natural light. Overall, the Prismacolor pencils are a really good coloured pencil to use, particularly if you're a beginner. That is because they are on the more affordable side of pencils, and also because they are softcore pencils. They're great for blending, easy to use, and excellent for creating a lot of layering and softer tone drawings. They do struggle with creating details, and that is because they are softer core, so they're not as good for retaining a point, and obviously there are some issues with their quality. But in general, I would recommend these pencils to artists, especially beginners, and I really do hope that you did find this video helpful. And of course, as I said, any materials that you would like to check out, they are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will be back next week with a brand new video, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and I will see you soon. Bye guys.